The intelligence center at Forward Operating Base Cushman hummed with the constant drone of computer servers and satellite feeds. Specialist Emma Reeves rubbed her tired eyes, staring at the sixth monitor displaying intercepted communications from the Korangal Valley. It was 1400 hours on a scorching September afternoon in Afghanistan, and she'd been on shift for 9 hours straight. At 24 years old, Emma had spent the last 14 months as an intelligence analyst, a job that sounded exciting to her recruiter back in Ohio, but consisted mostly of endless hours translating radio chatter, analyzing drone footage, and building pattern-of-life profiles on insurgent networks. She joined the army to escape the suffocating small-town life where everyone knew her as that poor Reeves girl, whose mother died of cancer when she was 16. But mostly, if she was honest with herself, she joined because of Jake Graves. Jake, who'd lived next door since they were kids. Jake, whose family had taken her in for dinners when her single mother was too sick to cook. Jake, who'd held her hand at the funeral and promised she'd never be alone. Jake, who'd enlisted in the army and convinced her she could be more than a waitress at the local diner. Lieutenant Jake Graves was currently leading a patrol somewhere in the mountains northeast of her position. Emma glanced at the operations board, tracking his unit's movement. They were supposed to return by 1600 hours. The door burst open. Captain Morrison strode in, his desert combat uniform dusty, his face ashen beneath his tan. The room fell silent. Morrison was never rattled. The former Ranger had survived 3 deployments and earned a Silver Star, but right now his hands were shaking. "Listen up," he said, his voice tight. "We've lost radio contact with Lieutenant Graves' convoy. Last known position was Grid November Bravo 2247. Emma's fingers froze on her keyboard. That was the same grid she'd been monitoring all morning, a known hostile area where insurgent activity had spiked in recent weeks. "QRF is launching now," Morrison continued, referring to the Quick Reaction Force. "But I need to brief you all. At 13:15 hours, Lieutenant Graves' convoy was hit by a complex ambush. IED strike followed by coordinated small arms fire and RPGs. We have confirmation of multiple casualties." The room spun. Emma gripped the edge of her desk. Morrison's eyes found hers across the room, and she knew. She already knew. "Lieutenant Graves is gone," he said quietly. "Early reports indicate no survivors. The area is too hot for immediate recovery operations." The words hit Emma like physical blows. Gone, no survivors, Jake was dead. Around her, other analysts murmured condolences. Everyone knew she and Jake had been friends since childhood. Someone touched her shoulder, but Emma couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Jake's laugh echoed in her memory, his voice from their last conversation 3 days ago. "When we get home, Em, I'm taking you to that fancy restaurant in Columbus you always talked about. No more excuses." She'd almost told him then, almost said the words she'd been holding inside for years. The next hours passed in a fog. Emma mechanically continued her work, processing intelligence reports, her hands moving while her mind remained frozen. At 1800 hours, Morrison ordered her to take a break. She stumbled to her quarters, a converted shipping container she shared with 3 other female soldiers, none currently present. She sat on her bunk, staring at the rifle propped in the corner, an M4 carbine she'd qualified expert with at basic training but had never fired outside a range. In 14 months in Afghanistan, she'd never left the wire, never seen real combat. She was just an intelligence analyst, safe behind concrete walls while soldiers like Jake faced death daily. At 2100 hours, unable to sleep, Emma returned to the intelligence center. The night shift looked at her sympathetically but said nothing. She logged into her station and began reviewing the day's intercepts, unable to stop herself from searching for anything related to the ambush. That's when she found it. Time-stamped at 10:42 hours, 2.5 hours before Jake's convoy was hit. A brief radio intercept in Pashto, partially garbled, flagged by the system but marked low priority due to incomplete translation. Emma's Pashto was excellent. She'd spent months training in the language, even hearing a local interpreter to tutor her during off hours. She pulled up the raw audio file and listened, her headphones blocking out the world. The voice was distorted, but she caught fragments. American officer, high value, alive for questioning, compound in the Northern Valley. Her heart hammered. She replayed it 3 times, transcribing every word. Then she pulled up the associated metadata, signal origin, approximate location. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-referencing with satellite imagery and previous intelligence reports. There, a compound in a remote valley, 15 kilometers from the ambush site. Known insurgent safe house. Minimal coalition presence in the area. Emma's mind raced. The intercept mentioned taking someone alive. The ambush happened exactly where predicted. What if Jake hadn't been killed? What if they'd captured him? She checked the distribution list for her intelligence reports. The morning intercept had been included in a routine daily summary, but buried among dozens of other reports. In the chaos of multiple ongoing operations, no one had flagged it as urgent. Until now. Emma printed everything: the intercept, translations, grid coordinates, satellite imagery. Her hands were steady now, adrenaline burning away the grief fog. She found Captain Morrison in his office, surrounded by after-action reports. "Sir, I need you to look at something." Morrison glanced up weary. "Reeves, you should be resting." "Sir, I have signals intelligence from before the ambush. They talked about capturing an American officer alive. I have coordinates for a compound, sir. What if Lieutenant Graves wasn't killed? What if he was taken?" Morrison studied the paper she thrust at him, his expression shifting from sympathy to interest to grim reality. He set them down carefully. "This is good work, specialist, solid analysis. But even if you're right, even if there's a chance he's alive," he paused, meeting her desperate eyes, "we can't authorize a rescue operation based on speculation. We'd need confirmation, drone surveillance, mission planning. And frankly, we don't have the assets. Every helicopter, every team is committed. I'm sorry, Emma, I truly am." "But sir..." "That's final, specialist. Get some rest. That's an order." Emma stumbled out of his office, the papers clutched in her hands. Back in her quarters, she spread them on her bunk. Satellite images of the compound. Grid coordinates burned into her memory, Jake's face haunting her vision. The official story: Lieutenant Jake Graves killed in action, a hero's death. But Emma knew something no one else seemed willing to believe. Jake was alive. Somewhere in those mountains he was waiting, suffering, hoping someone would come. Command had made their decision. They'd moved on. Emma stared at her rifle in the corner, her tactical vest hanging on a hook, her boots beside the door. She thought about Jake's family back home, who treated her like a daughter. She thought about every moment she'd been too afraid to tell him the truth. She thought about living the rest of her life knowing she'd done nothing while he died alone in enemy hands. At 400 hours, while the base slept, Specialist Emma Reeves made a decision that would change everything. She grabbed her rifle and began to gear up. Emma's hands moved with mechanical precision, though her heart threatened to burst through her chest. She pulled on her full combat uniform, something she'd worn for drills but never for actual operations. Desert camouflage pants, tan shirt, body armor with ceramic plates front and back. Each piece felt heavier than it should, weighted with the magnitude of what she was about to do. From her footlocker, she retrieved items she'd quietly accumulated over the past months. A tactical medical kit she'd purchased online before deployment, extra ammunition magazines for her M4, energy bars, water purification tablets. She'd always told herself she was just being prepared, but some part of her had known this moment might come. The hardest part was the equipment she needed to steal. At 4:15 hours, Emma slipped from her quarters into the pre-dawn darkness. The fob was quiet but never truly asleep. Guards walked perimeters. Night shift personnel moved between buildings. She knew every pattern, every blind spot. Intelligence analysts studied everything, including their own base security. The supply depot was her first target. She'd memorized the duty roster. Specialist Chen pulled night watch, and Chen was notorious for sleeping on duty. Emma picked the lock on the equipment cage using skills learned from a YouTube video months ago, practiced in secret. Inside, she grabbed night vision goggles, a handheld GPS unit, a suppressor for her rifle, and a tactical radio. Her throat tightened with each item. She was stealing military equipment. This was more than AWOL. This was theft, possibly espionage charges if they wanted to throw the book at her. But Jake's face flashed in her mind, and her resolve hardened. The motor pool was riskier. 2 guards patrolled the vehicle staging area where Humvees sat in neat rows. Emma waited in the shadows, watching their pattern. 12 minutes per circuit. When they disappeared around the far corner, she had a 4-minute window. She ran in a crouch to the nearest Humvee, praying the keys would be in the usual spot. Her hand found them tucked above the visor. Truck commanders always left them there for quick reaction force deployments. She slid into the driver's seat, heart hammering so loud she was certain someone would hear it. Emma had forged a movement order the night before, using Captain Morrison's digital signature that she'd copied from the intelligence database. It was crude, but in the dark, at a shift change, it might work. The engine roared to life, obscenely loud in the quiet dawn. She held her breath, but no alarm sounded. She drove slowly toward the main gate, where 2 soldiers manned the checkpoint. Emma recognized them, Private First Class Rodriguez and Sergeant Hayes, both ending their overnight shift and eager to be relieved. She pulled up, window down, forged order in hand. Her voice was steady despite her terror. Emergency supply run to Cop Blessing, Captain Morrison's orders. Rodriguez barely glanced at the paper, his eyes heavy with fatigue. This time of morning. QRF needs emergency resupply after yesterday's incident. Time sensitive. She kept her tone professional, bored even, as if this was routine. Hayes waved her through without even looking. Stay safe out there, specialist. The gate opened, and Emma drove into the Afghan dawn. For the first 5 miles, she expected helicopters to appear overhead, vehicles to chase her down. Every sound was a threat. But the radio remained silent. She'd left before anyone discovered the missing equipment or unauthorized departure. The reality of what she'd done crashed over her. She was outside the wire, alone, in one of the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan. She was a desk analyst who'd never seen combat. If the Taliban didn't kill her, the U.S. Army might court-martial her for 20 years. But Jake was out there, alive. She knew it in her bones. The road deteriorated quickly once she left the main supply route. The Humvee bounced over rocks and through dried creek beds as Emma navigated using the GPS coordinates burned into her memory. Mountains rose around her, brown and hostile, dotted with caves and compounds where insurgents could be watching. Her mind drifted to memories as she drove, perhaps because she needed the comfort, or perhaps because she was preparing to die. She was 12 again, crying in Jake's treehouse because kids at school called her charity case after her mother got sick. Jake had put his arm around her shoulders and said, "You're not charity, Em. You're family. Always will be." She was 17, watching Jake in his army dress uniform at his going-away party, her heart breaking because he was leaving, and she'd never told him how she felt. She was 23, arriving at the same fob where Jake was stationed, seeing his face light up with surprised joy. "Em, what are you doing here?" And she'd wanted to say, "I followed you halfway around the world because I love you," but instead she just hugged him and said, "Guess we're stuck with each other." The Humvee lurched over a particularly nasty rut, snapping Emma back to reality. The terrain was becoming impassable. She checked the GPS, still 8 kilometers from the compound. She'd have to continue on foot. Emma parked the vehicle in a small canyon, attempting to camouflage it with a desert tan tarp from the back. She loaded herself down with gear: rifle, ammunition, water, medical kit, GPS, night vision goggles. The weight was crushing, easily 60 pounds, but she'd trained for this in basic training. She could do it. As the sun climbed higher, the temperature soared. Emma moved through the mountains, using every bit of cover, staying in ravines and behind rock formations. Her intel training helped. She'd studied this terrain on satellite images, knew the likely positions for enemy observation posts. 3 hours later, drenched in sweat and trembling with exhaustion, Emma bellied up to a rocky outcrop overlooking a valley. She raised her binoculars, hands shaking. There, the compound from the satellite imagery. Mud brick walls, several buildings, vehicles parked outside, armed men walking the perimeter. And then her heart stopped. A figure being dragged between buildings, taller than the others, Western clothes, moving with a limp. Jake. Emma's breath caught in her throat. He was alive, beaten, injured, but alive. Her intelligence had been correct. She watched them throw him roughly into a building and slam the door. Rage and determination flooded through her, burning away the fear. Command had abandoned him, written him off as dead. But Emma was here now. She settled into her observation position, pulling out a small notebook. For the next 12 hours, she would watch, analyze, and plan. She was an intelligence analyst. This was what she did best. Except now, instead of sitting safely behind a desk, she'd have to execute the mission herself. As the sun began its descent, Emma checked her rifle one more time. Tonight, she would become someone she'd never imagined. Tonight, she would go to war. Emma lay motionless in the rocks, the Afghan sun beating down mercilessly on her position. Through her binoculars, she cataloged every detail of the compound below with the same methodical precision she used analyzing intelligence reports. Guard rotation, every 45 minutes. 3 men on the perimeter, 2 at the main gate, at least 10 more inside based on movement patterns. 15 hostiles, maybe more, against 1 intelligence analyst with 3 magazines and a prayer. The odds were insane. She pulled out her notebook, sketching the compound layout, marking guard positions, timing their movements. Her training at Fort Huachuca flooded back, the instructors drilling into them. Intelligence wins wars. Know your enemy better than he knows himself. Emma had spent 14 months studying these insurgents. She knew their tactics, their patterns, their mistakes. They were experienced fighters, but they'd grown comfortable, operating in an area where coalition forces rarely ventured. They weren't expecting an attack. Certainly not from a single American soldier. At 1400 hours, she saw Jake again. 2 guards dragged him from the building into the courtyard. Even from 300 meters away, Emma could see he'd been beaten. His face was swollen, his movements pained. They threw him against a wall and 1 guard kicked him in the ribs. Emma's finger tightened on her rifle. She forced herself to breathe, to think like an analyst, not an enraged friend. Shooting now would accomplish nothing but getting them both killed. They dragged Jake back inside after 10 minutes. Emma marked the building on her sketch: northeast corner, ground floor, 1 door, 2 small windows. That's where they were holding him. As afternoon faded to dusk, doubt crept in like the lengthening shadows. What was she doing? She was Specialist Emma Reeves, a girl from rural Ohio who'd scored high on the ASVAB and spent her deployment behind a computer screen. She'd qualified expert on the rifle range, sure, but controlled shooting at paper targets bore no resemblance to combat. She'd killed exactly 0 people in her entire life. By tonight, that number would change or she'd be dead. Emma closed her eyes, remembering her last conversation with Jake. They'd been sitting outside the dining facility, watching the sunset over the mountains. He'd been unusually quiet. "You ever think about after?" he'd asked. "After all this?" "Every day," she'd admitted. "I think about a house, somewhere quiet, maybe back in Ohio, maybe somewhere new, a porch where you can watch the sunset without worrying about mortars." He'd looked at her then, something unspoken in his eyes. Would you want to see what that looks like, together?" She'd frozen, terrified and hopeful at once. Before she could answer, his radio had crackled with orders for the next day's patrol. Emma opened her eyes, staring at the compound. She'd wasted so much time being afraid. If she died tonight, at least she'd have tried. At least Jake would know someone had come for him. As darkness fell, Emma prepared. She checked her rifle, 30 rounds per magazine, 90 total. She attached the suppressor, reducing but not eliminating the sound. She activated the night vision goggles, bathing the world in green light. She said a prayer her mother had taught her as a child. At 2200 hours, she began her descent. The terrain provided good cover: rocks, dried creek beds, sparse vegetation. Emma moved slowly, freezing whenever a guard looked in her direction. It took 40 minutes to cover 300 meters. The first guard never knew she was there. He was smoking a cigarette at the northwest corner, his rifle slung casually over his shoulder. Emma's heart hammered as she approached from behind. Every instructor's voice echoed. "Center mass, 2 shots, breathe." The suppressed rifle coughed twice. The guard dropped. Emma stood frozen, staring at the body. She just killed someone, actually killed a human being. Nausea rose in her throat, but she forced it down. No time. No time for guilt or horror or humanity. Jake needed her. She dragged the body behind a water tank and took his radio, listening to the chatter. They were relaxed, bored. One complained about the food. Another talked about his family in Kandahar. Emma moved to the next position. The second guard was urinating against the compound wall. 2 more suppressed shots. He collapsed. Her hands were steadier now. Her mind had shifted into a cold, analytical state. Each guard was a problem to solve, a target to eliminate. She'd worry about her soul later. The third guard was harder. He was alert, scanning the perimeter with night vision. Emma waited 20 minutes for him to turn away. When he did, she moved fast, closing the distance, 2 shots, moving before he hit the ground. 3 down, at least 12 to go. Emma reached the northeast building, pressing herself against the mud brick wall. Through the small window, she could hear voices inside. She couldn't understand all the Pashto, but she caught enough. They were discussing moving their prisoner in the morning, possibly to Pakistan. If Emma waited until morning, Jake would be gone forever. She found the door, crude wood, single lock. She tried the handle. Locked. Emma pulled out a small pry bar from her tactical vest and worked it into the frame. The wood was old, weathered. It gave way with a crack that sounded like thunder in her ears. She froze, waiting for alarms. Nothing. Emma pushed the door open, rifle raised, night vision revealing a dark corridor. A guard sat at the far end, half asleep. She fired twice. He slumped forward. 3 doors branched off the hallway. Emma tried the first, empty storage. The second, more storage. The third was locked from the outside. This was it. She shot the lock off and pushed inside. Jake lay on the floor, hands bound, face bloody and swollen. He looked up at her with his one good eye, confused, delirious. "Em," his voice was a broken whisper. "No, you're not real. I'm hallucinating again." Emma knelt beside him, cutting his bonds with her knife. Her hands were shaking now, tears streaming down her face behind her night vision goggles. "I'm real, Jake. I'm here. I'm getting you out." "You came," he breathed, disbelief and wonder mixing. "You actually came for me." "Did you think I wouldn't?" She helped him to his feet. He could barely stand. "Em, there are 15 of them. I know we're leaving now." She supported his weight, moving toward the door. They made it 5 steps into the corridor when shouts erupted outside. Someone had discovered the bodies. The compound exploded with activity. Lights blazed on. Men rushed from buildings, shouting commands. Emma and Jake were trapped inside, surrounded, with 90 meters of open ground between them and freedom. The night had just become a war zone. "They know we're here," Emma hissed, pulling Jake against the wall as voices shouted in Pashto outside. Flashlight beams swept across the windows. The compound was waking up, an angry hornet's nest she'd just kicked. Jake could barely stand. His left leg dragged, his breathing was labored, and blood seeped through his torn uniform. But his eyes were clear now, focused. You need to leave me. Get out while you can." "Shut up." Emma checked her rifle, 60 rounds left, against at least a dozen fighters who knew this terrain, who had the advantage of numbers and position. "We're both leaving." The first insurgent burst through the door. Emma fired on instinct, 3 rounds center mass. He dropped, his AK-47 clattering to the floor. She grabbed it, thrusting it into Jake's hands. "Can you shoot?" "For you, I'll walk through hell firing." They moved into the corridor. Through the shattered doorway, Emma could see muzzle flashes lighting up the courtyard. Bullets punched through the mud brick walls, sending fragments of clay and stone spraying. She returned fire through the doorway, forcing the insurgents to take cover. "Back door," Jake gasped, pointing. "There's always a back door in these compounds." They stumbled through the building, Jake leaning heavily on Emma's shoulder. Behind them, footsteps thundered, insurgents entering the building. Emma spun and fired blindly down the corridor, the rifle's report deafening in the enclosed space. Someone screamed. They found the rear exit, a small wooden door that Jake kicked open. The night air hit them, cooler now, filled with gunfire and shouting. The perimeter wall was 30 meters away, 30 meters of open ground. "Smoke," Jake said. "Please tell me you brought smoke." Emma pulled 2 smoke grenades from her vest, stolen military equipment that might now save their lives. She threw both, and gray-white clouds billowed across the courtyard. They ran. Emma had never run so hard in her life. Jake's weight threatened to drag her down, but adrenaline gave her impossible strength. Bullets snapped through the air around them, invisible death passing inches away. Something tugged at her sleeve, a round missing her arm by millimeters. They reached the perimeter wall. Emma boosted Jake up, her muscles screaming. He rolled over the top and dropped to the other side with a grunt of pain. Emma followed, grabbing the rough stone and hauling herself up. A bullet struck the wall beside her head. Rock fragments cut her face. She didn't feel it. She dropped down beside Jake and they ran into the darkness, the compound erupting in chaos behind them. They'd made it maybe 50 meters when Jake's leg gave out. He crashed to the ground, crying out in pain. Emma tried to lift him, but he was dead weight. "Leave me," he gasped. "Please, you've done enough." "No," she could hear engines starting, trucks mobilizing to hunt them. "Get up, Jake, get up." He struggled to his feet and they staggered forward. Behind them, headlights swept across the valley. Voices shouted coordinates. Dogs barked, they had tracking dogs. Emma's mind raced through their options. They couldn't outrun vehicles. They couldn't hide, the dogs would find them. They needed distance, concealment, time. A bullet cracked past her ear. She turned and saw them, 3 insurgents on foot, closing fast. Emma raised her rifle and fired. One dropped. The others dove for cover. She grabbed Jake and they pushed forward into a dried riverbed, the steep banks providing momentary cover. "I can't," Jake's voice was weak. In the moonlight she saw blood spreading across his shoulder. Fresh blood, he'd been hit. "No, no, no." Emma lowered him against the bank, her hands finding the wound. The bullet had gone through his shoulder, missing major arteries but bleeding heavily. She ripped open her medical kit, hands shaking as she packed the wound with gauze. Jake's hand caught hers. "You came for me, you actually came." "Of course I came, you idiot." Tears blurred her vision as she worked. "Did you think I'd leave you here?" I thought I'd die without telling you," he coughed, grimacing. "That I love you, have loved you since we were kids, every day, every single day." "Jake, stop, save your strength." "Need to say it, in case we don't." Another cough, flecks of blood on his lips. "Don't make it." Emma finished the bandage, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. Above them, voices drew closer. Flashlight beams swept the area. They had minutes, maybe seconds. "We're making it," she said fiercely. "You're going to survive, and we're going home, and you're taking me to that fancy restaurant in Columbus. You promised." "Best promise I ever made." Jake tried to smile, but pain twisted it into a grimace. Emma helped him up. His blood soaked through her uniform, warm and sticky. They moved along the riverbed, using the banks for cover. Behind them, the search intensified. Vehicle engines roared. Radio chatter crackled through the night. Her GPS was gone, shattered by a bullet. Her radio had been hit too, the electronics sparking uselessly. They were alone in hostile territory with no communications, no extraction plan, and Jake bleeding out in her arms. They found a small cave, barely more than an overhang in the rocks, as dawn began to paint the eastern sky pink. Emma pulled Jake inside, both of them collapsing against the stone. "How far did we get?" Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. Emma checked the stars, calculated their position. Maybe 3 kilometers, not enough. Behind them, she could hear trucks searching the valley, dogs barking. The insurgents weren't giving up. Why would they? An American prisoner had escaped, aided by a solo female soldier. It was an insult they couldn't tolerate. Jake's head lolled against her shoulder. His breathing was shallow, rapid, shock setting in. Emma checked his wound, still bleeding but slower. The tourniquet was holding, for now. She had 2 magazines left, 28 rounds total, 1 smoke grenade, no food, a single canteen of water. And somewhere out there, insurgents hunted them with vehicles, weapons, and intimate knowledge of the terrain. Emma looked at Jake's pale face and made a silent vow. She'd come this far. She'd killed 6 men, stolen military equipment, and launched a 1-woman rescue mission into enemy territory. She wasn't stopping now. As the sun rose over the Afghan mountains, Emma Reeves prepared for the longest fight of her life. The cave was barely large enough for both of them. Emma sat with Jake's head in her lap, watching the valley below through a gap in the rocks. Truck engines echoed across the mountains. Dogs barked in the distance. The insurgents were conducting a systematic search, grid by grid. Jake's fever had started an hour after dawn. His forehead burned under Emma's hand, the wound infection spreading despite the antibiotics she'd administered from her kit. He drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling about Ohio, about his family, about missions gone wrong. Emma forced water between his lips and whispered reassurances she didn't believe. At 1100 hours, a search party passed within 20 meters of their position. Emma held her breath, her hand over Jake's mouth to muffle any sounds. 3 insurgents with AK-47s and a handler with 2 German shepherds moved slowly along the riverbed. The dogs caught a scent. They strained at their leashes, barking toward the cave. Emma raised her rifle, finger on the trigger. If the dogs found them, she'd have to kill all 3 men before they could radio their position. 3 targets, 28 rounds. She calculated angles, firing positions, the seconds it would take to acquire each target. The handler jerked the leashes, yelling at the dogs. They'd found something, probably the blood trail from earlier. He studied the ground, then spoke into his radio. Emma's Pashto was good enough to understand. Blood here. They came this way, moving east. They continued past the cave, following the false trail Emma had deliberately created by dragging her bloody sleeve along the rocks in the wrong direction. Emma exhaled slowly. First rule of evasion, misdirection. When the search party disappeared, she checked Jake's wound. The bleeding had stopped, but the surrounding tissue was inflamed, hot to touch. Infection was winning. He needed real medical care, surgery, antibiotics, IV fluids. She had field dressings and expired pills. Jake whispered, his eyes fluttering open. Water. She held the canteen to his lips. He drank greedily, then coughed. How long? 16 hours since the extraction, morning of day 2. They'll be looking for both of us now, the whole region. I know. Emma had accepted that reality. By now, command knew she'd gone AWOL. They probably thought she'd been captured or killed, or worse, that she'd defected. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was trying to rescue an American soldier while the American military probably considered her a deserter. Jake's hand found hers. Why did you do this, really? Emma looked at his pale, fever-bright eyes. After everything, he deserved the truth. Because I love you. I've loved you since we were 17 and you left for basic training. I love you every single day I see you. And I couldn't lose you without fighting. Tears tracked down his dirty face. I'm sorry it took getting captured for you to tell me. I'm sorry it took you getting captured for me to have the courage. They sat in silence, hands intertwined, listening to the search parties crisscross the valley below. Emma's analyst mind never stopped working. She memorized patrol patterns, noted the intervals between radio checks, identified weaknesses in their search grid. At 1400 hours, opportunity presented itself. 2 insurgents on foot patrol, separated from the main search party, following a ridge line 300 meters away. They were careless, tired from hours of searching, their rifles slung over their shoulders. Emma made a decision. They needed supplies, food, water, better weapons, radio to monitor enemy communications. She couldn't let this chance pass. Stay here, she told Jake. Don't move, don't make noise. I'll be back in 15 minutes. Don't. But she was already gone, moving like a ghost through the rocks. The girl from Ohio who'd spent 14 months behind a desk had disappeared. In her place was someone harder, someone who'd killed 6 men and would kill more without hesitation. Emma used the terrain perfectly, approaching from downwind, staying in the shadows. She'd learned this from studying insurgent tactics, reading after-action reports, analyzing how they moved through their own country. The first insurgent never heard her. A knife to the kidney, hand over his mouth, lowering him silently. The second turned at his partner's absence. Emma fired twice, suppressed rounds that sounded like coughs in the wind. He dropped. She took everything useful. 2 AK-47s with full magazines, a radio, 4 bottles of water, dried fruit and non-bread, a first aid kit. Even their boots, Jake's, were falling apart. When she returned to the cave, Jake stared at her like he'd never seen her before. You killed 2 men like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. Emma cleaned the blood from her knife, hand steady, but it was necessary. You've changed. We all change. She offered him water and bread. Eat, you need strength. Over the next 36 hours, Emma became a guerrilla fighter. She used her intelligence training to predict enemy movements, set false trails, create diversions. When another patrol came too close, she ambushed them from high ground. 3 quick shots, 3 dead insurgents before they could return fire. She was methodical, efficient, remorseless. Each kill gave them more time, more supplies, more chance of survival. Jake watched in amazement as the quiet analyst transformed into a warrior. But he also saw the cost, the way her hands trembled after each engagement, how she stared at nothing during rest periods, the nightmares when she finally slept. On the 3rd night, huddled in a different cave as rain poured down, Jake asked the question that haunted them both. How do we get out of this, Em? Emma had been thinking about nothing else. She pulled out the GPS she'd taken from a dead insurgent, studying the topographic map. Higher ground. There's a ridgeline 8 kilometers northwest. Clear sightlines, good for signal fires or panels. If any coalition aircraft fly over, they might spot us. 8 kilometers through enemy territory. I can barely walk 300 meters. Then I'll carry you. Emma's voice was steel. We didn't survive this long to give up now. Jake touched her face, his fever-warm hand gentle. I don't deserve you. You're right, you deserve better, she smiled, exhausted. But you're stuck with me. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. The rain would cover their movement, wash away their tracks. Emma checked her ammunition, 2 magazines for her M4, 5 for the AK-47s, enough for one more fight. Maybe 2 if she was lucky. At dawn, they would move. They moved at 500 hours, under cover of darkness and rain. Emma had Jake's arm draped over her shoulders, supporting most of his weight. His fever had broken during the night, but he was weak, dehydrated, and the infected shoulder wound had left his left arm nearly useless. 8 kilometers. On flat ground with a healthy person, maybe 90 minutes. Through hostile mountains with an injured soldier, avoiding enemy patrols, moving only at night. Emma estimated 3 days minimum. They had supplies for maybe 1. The first night they covered 2 kilometers before Jake collapsed. Emma dragged him into a cluster of boulders as dawn broke, both of them gasping for air. Her back screamed from carrying his weight. Her legs trembled with exhaustion. She'd lost at least 15 pounds since leaving the fob. Her uniform hung loose, her face gaunt. I'm slowing you down, Jake whispered, guilt heavy in his voice. Shut up and drink. Emma held the canteen to his lips. They were down to 1 bottle of water. She'd have to find a stream soon. Jake obeyed, then studied her face. You look like hell, Em. You should see the other guys. She tried to smile, but it felt wrong on her face. Everything felt wrong now. She'd killed 11 men in 4 days. 11 human beings who had families, lives, dreams. She'd ended them all. Hey, Jake's hand cupped her cheek. Don't go there, don't think about them. How can I not? I'm a murderer, Jake, 11 times over. You're a soldier, there's a difference. Is there? Emma's voice cracked. I wasn't even supposed to be a real soldier. I pushed papers. I analyzed data. Now I've got more confirmed kills than most infantry guys in our unit. Jake pulled her close with his good arm. She collapsed against his chest, too exhausted to cry. You're the bravest person I've ever known, he said quietly. You came into hell alone to save me. Those men would have killed us both without hesitation. You did what you had to do. I don't even recognize myself anymore. I do, you're still Em. Still the girl who stayed up all night helping me study for finals. Still the woman who writes letters to my mom every week. You're just also a badass warrior now. Despite everything, Emma laughed, a short, broken sound. Your mom is going to kill me if she finds out about this. If we survive this, I'll protect you from her. Deal. They slept in shifts, Emma keeping watch while Jake's fever climbed again. She forced more antibiotics down his throat, changed his bandages, and prayed to a god she wasn't sure existed anymore. The second night they encountered a patrol. 4 insurgents with flashlights, moving along the same ridgeline Emma had chosen. She saw them 200 meters away and made a split-second decision, engage or evade. With Jake unable to move quickly, evasion wasn't an option. Emma settled into a firing position, her rifle aimed at the lead man. Her hands were steady now. No shaking, no hesitation. She'd become someone who killed as naturally as breathing. She squeezed the trigger 4 times. 4 shots, 4 bodies. The sound echoed across the valley and she knew it would bring more searchers. They had maybe 30 minutes. Can you run? She asked Jake. He looked at the 4 dead men, then at her. Something like fear flickered in his eyes, not of the enemy but of what she'd become. Yeah, I can run. They pushed hard, Jake gritting his teeth against the pain, Emma supporting him with desperate strength. Behind them, voices shouted. More flashlights swept the darkness. They found a narrow crevice in the rocks, barely wide enough for both of them. Emma squeezed in first, pulling Jake after her. They pressed together in the tiny space, barely breathing as the search party passed within meters. In the darkness, Jake's lips found hers. The kiss was desperate, tasting of blood and salt and survival. When they broke apart, both were crying silently. "If we die here," Jake whispered, "I need you to know every moment of this was worth it, every second with you." "We're not dying here." Emma's voice was fierce. "I didn't kill 11 men to die in a damn cave." On the third day, they found water, a small stream trickling between rocks. Emma filled their bottles while Jake washed the worst of the dirt and blood from his face. For a moment in the afternoon sun, they could almost pretend they were camping, not running for their lives. "Tell me about after," Jake said, lying in the shade. "What do you want to do when we get home?" "Sleep for a week, eat real food, never see another mountain." Emma paused. "Maybe go to that restaurant you promised me." "I'm thinking somewhere nicer now. You deserve 5-star treatment after this." "I deserve therapy after this." "That too," Jake laughed, then winced at the pain it caused. "Seriously though, Em, what do you want for us?" Emma looked at this man she'd loved for so long, now broken and scarred but alive because she'd refused to give up. "I want normal. I want to wake up next to you without checking for insurgents. I want to grocery shop and complain about traffic and have boring weekends where nothing explodes." "Sounds perfect." Jake's eyes were heavy, fever and exhaustion pulling him under. "Marry me, Em." "What?" "When we get home, marry me. I know it's crazy, but we're in the middle of Afghanistan with people trying to kill us. Everything's crazy. At least let's be crazy together." Emma kissed him again, gentle this time. "Ask me again when we're not covered in blood and hiding from the Taliban." "I'm going to hold you to that." That night they reached the ridgeline. Emma helped Jake to the summit as the sun set, painting the mountains in gold and crimson. Below them, the valley stretched for miles. Above them, empty sky. Emma built a signal panel from Jake's torn uniform and a reflective emergency blanket. She arranged rocks in an X pattern, the international symbol for need assistance. Then they waited, exposed on the highest point for miles. Hopping friendly forces would find them before the enemy did. Day 1 on the ridgeline. Nothing. Emma and Jake lay exposed on the barren summit, the sun merciless overhead. They had no shade, minimal water, and nowhere to hide if insurgents climbed the ridge. Every hour felt like tempting fate. Jake's condition worsened. The fever returned with a vengeance, his body fighting an infection it was losing against. He mumbled incoherently, calling out for his mother, for Emma, reliving the ambush that had started this nightmare. Emma forced water between his cracked lips and scanned the sky obsessively. She knew coalition flight patterns. Transport helicopters flew supply routes at dawn and dusk. Apache gunships patrolled during daylight. Predator drones circled continuously. Someone had to pass overhead eventually. Unless command had written off this entire area, unless they'd stopped looking. She pushed the thought away and checked her rifle. One magazine left 30 rounds. If insurgents found them, she'd fight until the last bullet, then use her knife. She wasn't going back to that compound. Jake wasn't either. At 1600 hours, she heard engines, not helicopters, trucks, moving up the mountain road below. Emma grabbed her binoculars and counted 4 vehicles, maybe 20 fighters total. They were searching systematically, moving higher. "Toward the ridge." "Jake," she shook him gently, "we might have company." His eyes opened, fever-bright but aware. "How many?" "Too many." Emma did the math. 20 insurgents versus 1 analyst with 30 rounds and a half-conscious lieutenant. The numbers didn't work. She could try to hide them, but there was nowhere to go on the exposed ridge. She could ambush the first truck, but the others would flank them. She could surrender, but they'd both die slowly after what she'd done to their fighters. No good options, only degrees of bad. Jake's hand gripped hers. "When they come, you run, promise me." "I'm not leaving you." You have to. You've done everything possible, more than anyone could ask, but you don't have to die here. Emma looked at this man who'd been part of her life since childhood, who she'd followed across the world, who she'd killed for. I came here for you. I'm staying with you. End of discussion. The trucks were closer now, engines grinding up the steep terrain. Emma positioned herself behind rocks, rifle aimed downslope. If they were going to die, she'd make it cost them. Then a sound that made her heart leap. Distant, rhythmic, helicopter rotors. She grabbed the signal panel, waving it frantically overhead. The sound grew louder, not one helicopter but multiple aircraft. The rotor wash was distinct. Heavy birds, American heavy birds. Emma's hands shook as she waved the reflective panel, catching the afternoon sun. Come on, see us. The helicopters passed overhead, two Apache and a Blackhawk, flying fast and low. Emma's heart shattered as they continued east without slowing. They hadn't seen them. Jake squeezed her hand. It's okay, Em, you tried. No, Emma refused to accept it. She pulled out a smoke grenade, her last one saved for emergencies. This qualified. She popped it and threw it onto the barren ridge, orange smoke billowing into the sky. The trucks were 300 meters away now. She could hear voices, see muzzle flashes as they test-fired weapons. They knew their prey was cornered. Emma raised her rifle, acquiring the first target. Her finger rested on the trigger. Then the helicopters banked hard, turning back. The Apache came in low and fast, their 30 chain guns opening up with a sound like the world tearing apart. Explosions ripped through the insurgent convoy. Trucks exploded into fireballs. Men scattered, trying to find cover that didn't exist. The Blackhawk descended toward the ridge, not landing but hovering 10 feet above the ground. The side door slid open and Emma saw them, operators in full tactical gear, fast-roping down. Not regular army. These were Night Stalkers, 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. 6 operators hit the ground, forming a defensive perimeter around Emma and Jake. The team leader, a master sergeant with a grizzled face and cold eyes, took one look at them and spoke into his radio. Jackpot confirmed. 2 souls, 1 critical, need immediate extract. A medic rushed to Jake, assessing his wounds with practiced efficiency. Emma stood frozen, unable to process that rescue was actually happening. Specialist Reeves, the master sergeant asked. She nodded, waiting for handcuffs, accusations, arrest. Command wants you back, both of you, now move. The Apache continued hammering the insurgent position, rockets and chain gun fire turning the mountainside into hell. Return fire sparked off the Blackhawk's armor. An RPG streaked past, missing by meters. The operators worked with mechanical precision. 2 lifted Jake onto a stretcher. Another grabbed Emma's arm, pulling her toward the helicopter. She stumbled, legs numb from days of constant movement. They loaded Jake first, the medic already working. IV lines, oxygen, trauma care that looked like magic after Emma's crude field dressings. Then hands pulled her aboard, the Blackhawk lifting before she was even fully inside. An operator pushed her into a seat, strapping her in. She watched Afghanistan fall away beneath them, the ridge where they'd waited for death, the burning convoy, the mountains that had been their prison for 7 days. Jake lay on the stretcher across from her, the medic working frantically. His eyes found hers through the chaos. You did it, he mouthed. You actually did it. Emma couldn't respond, couldn't feel relief or joy or anything. She was numb, disconnected, watching herself from outside her body. The master sergeant sat beside her, his expression unreadable. Hell of a thing you did, specialist, going in alone like that. Emma stared at her hands. They were caked in blood, some hers, most Jake's, some from 11 dead men. Is he going to make it? My medic's the best there is. He's got a chance. What happens when we land? The master sergeant's jaw tightened. Above my pay grade, but between you and me, You're either getting a medal or a court-martial, maybe both. Emma nodded. She'd expected as much. I don't care what they do to me, as long as Jake lives. He's alive because of you. Remember that, whatever comes next. The fob appeared on the horizon, concrete barriers, guard towers, the command center where this had all started. Emma felt Jake's hand grip hers weakly. No regrets, he whispered. No regrets, she agreed. The helicopter descended, and Emma Reeves prepared to face the consequences of becoming a hero. The Black Hawk touched down at Fob Cushemond at 1847 hours. Emma hadn't been gone even 8 days, but it felt like a lifetime. Medics rushed Jake away on a stretcher, shouting medical terminology Emma barely understood. She tried to follow, but 2 military police officers blocked her path. Specialist Reeves, you need to come with us. They didn't handcuff her, but they didn't need to. Emma was too exhausted to run, too numb to care. They escorted her to a holding facility, a converted shipping container with a cot, a sink, and a guard posted outside. She sat on the cot, staring at her filthy hands. 11 men. She'd killed 11 human beings. The number echoed in her mind like a death toll bell. Captain Morrison arrived 30 minutes later, his face a storm of emotions. Relief, anger, disbelief. He sat across from her, silent for a long moment. Do you have any idea what you've done? He finally asked. Emma met his eyes. I brought him home, sir. You stole military equipment. You went AWOL in a combat zone. You engaged enemy forces without authorization. The Afghan government thinks we launched an unauthorized raid. There are diplomatic consequences. The Pentagon is furious. Morrison leaned back, exhaling hard. And somehow, against all logic and military doctrine, you single-handedly rescued a captured officer from a fortified enemy position. How is he, sir? Lieutenant Graves. In surgery, severe infection, malnutrition, multiple fractures from torture, but the doctors say he'll live. Morrison's voice softened. Because of you. Emma nodded, feeling nothing. She should be relieved, grateful something. Instead, she felt hollow. What happens now, sir? Investigation. Army CID, intelligence debrief, psychological evaluation. There are people who want you court-martialed for desertion and theft. There are others, he paused. Others who think you're the bravest soldier they've ever seen. The intelligence you gathered from that compound, locations, documents you photographed on your phone, has already led to 3 high-value target captures and prevented 2 attacks. Over the next 3 weeks, Emma lived in bureaucratic limbo. She was interviewed 17 times by different agencies, Criminal Investigation Command, military intelligence, JAG officers, psychiatrists. She recounted every detail, the intercept she'd found, the decision to go alone, each kill, the extraction. The psychiatrist, a kind-faced major named Dr. Chen, was the only one who asked how she felt about it all. I don't know, Emma admitted. I did what I had to do, but I see their faces when I close my eyes. I hear them. Some of them called for their mothers when they died. That's called being human, specialist. Don't lose that. I already feel lost. Jake recovered slowly. They wouldn't let Emma see him for 2 weeks, not until the investigation cleared certain protocols. When she finally entered the hospital ward, he was sitting up, arm in a sling, face still bruised but healing. He smiled when he saw her. Hey, stranger. Hey, yourself. Emma sat beside his bed, suddenly awkward. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck, tortured for a week, and rescued by a badass intelligence analyst who went full Rambo. He reached for her hand. They told me what you're facing. Court-martial charges. Yeah, Emma shrugged. Worth it, though. You could go to prison. You're alive, that's all that matters. Jake pulled her close with his good arm. I testified at your hearing, told them everything, how you analyzed the intelligence command ignored, how you came alone because no one else would authorize a rescue. I told them you're a hero, not a criminal. What did they say? That it's complicated. The story leaked to the press on day 19. Intelligence clerk's daring solo rescue mission hit major news outlets. Public opinion exploded. Social media campaigns, veteran advocacy groups, congressional representatives calling for recognition rather than punishment. The Army found itself in an impossible position. Punish a soldier who'd violated regulations but achieved extraordinary results, or reward behavior that could set dangerous precedents. The decision came on day 23. Captain Morrison delivered it personally. No court-martial. You're receiving a letter of reprimand, official punishment for your record, but he almost smiled. You're also being recommended for the Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry in action. Emma blinked, sir. The Army doesn't know what to do with you, Reeves. You broke every rule but got results we couldn't achieve with entire teams. So they're doing both, punishing you officially, honoring you unofficially. He handed her transfer orders. You're going stateside. Reassignment to Fort Meade. Your combat deployment is over. That night Jake found her packing in her quarters. He was mobile now, walking with only a slight limp. So, he said, Maryland or somewhere else. Emma looked at this man she'd crossed mountains for, killed for, nearly died for. I was thinking we could figure it out together, if you still want to after everything. Jake crossed the room and kissed her, not desperate like in the cave, but certain, real, full of promise. Emma Reeves, when we get back to the States, I'm taking you to the fanciest restaurant in D.C., then I'm asking you properly to marry me, with a ring and everything. And if I say yes, then we build that quiet life we talked about. The porch, the sunsets, the boring weekends where nothing explodes. Sounds perfect. 6 months later, Emma stood in dress uniform at Fort Myer, receiving her Silver Star. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an armed enemy while serving as an intelligence analyst." Specialist Reeves displayed extraordinary heroism by conducting a solo rescue operation deep in enemy territory, resulting in the successful extraction of a captured American officer. Jake stood in the audience, fully recovered, wearing his own dress uniform. Beside him sat both their families, Jake's parents who'd always treated Emma like a daughter, Emma's father who'd flown in from Ohio, tears streaming down his weathered face. After the ceremony, a young private approached, a nervous intelligence analyst, 20 years old, fresh-faced and uncertain. "Ma'am, I read about what you did. I just wanted to say, you inspired me. I'm an analyst too, and sometimes I feel like I'm not a real soldier, you know." Emma looked at this young woman and saw herself 2 years ago, untested, unsure, not knowing what she was capable of. She put a hand on the private's shoulder. "Listen to me. Being a soldier isn't about your MOS or where you're stationed. It's about doing what's right when no one else will. It's about refusing to give up on the people who matter." She smiled. "You're stronger than you know. We all are." The private saluted and walked away, standing a little taller. Jake appeared beside Emma, taking her hand, ready to go home. Emma looked at her medal, thought about the 11 men she'd killed, the scars she'd carry forever, the nightmares that still woke her at 300. She thought about the impossible things she'd done and the life waiting ahead. "Yeah," she said, "I'm ready." They walked away from the ceremony together, two soldiers who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and chosen to build something better. Emma knew she'd never be the same person who left Ohio. That girl was gone, replaced by someone harder, scarred, but also certain of who she was. She'd walk through hell and come out the other side. And she'd do it all again.